September 2015. Hundreds of thousands of refugees were moving toward Europe. Governments were closing their borders. Europe was divided. Inside the German chancellery, Angela Merkel faced one of the most consequential decisions of her political career. Hours later, 4 words would echo around the world: "Wir schaffen das." But to understand how a scientist from East Germany became the leader making that decision, we have to go back to the beginning. On July 17, 1954, Angela Dorothea Kasner was registered in Hamburg, West Germany. Her father, Horst Kasner, was a Lutheran theologian, and her mother, Herland, a teacher. But just weeks after her birth, the family made an unusual relocation. They traveled in reverse, crossing the emerging Cold War divide from the capitalist West into the socialist German Democratic Republic. Horst Kasner had accepted a pastoral posting in the East German village of Quitzow. The family eventually settled in Templin, a small town surrounded by quiet Brandenburg forests. Here, childhood unfolded under the watchful eye of an authoritarian state. Horst's position as a pastor required a delicate compromise, maintaining a church presence within a regime hostile to religion. This environment demanded absolute discretion. Daily life was shaped by silent rules and the knowledge that a careless word could carry severe consequences. Throughout the 1970s, the Stasi, East Germany's state security service, kept detailed surveillance files on the Kasner household, monitoring their visitors and conversations. In this quiet, guarded world, young Angela learned the necessity of self-control. Survival behind the Iron Curtain meant keeping thoughts private, observing before acting, and speaking only when necessary. It was here, in the stillness of Templin, that the foundation of her methodical, disciplined nature was established. In the classroom, Angela Kasner excelled, demonstrating an early mastery of mathematics. By 1973, her academic achievements earned her admission to the University of Leipzig to study physics. In a state built on ideological compliance, the hard sciences offered a rare sanctuary of absolute truth, governed by verifiable laws rather than political dogma. Throughout her university years, she remained quiet and highly observant, developing habits of systematic analysis that would define her intellectual foundation. After earning her diploma in 1978, she relocated to East Berlin to pursue her doctorate at the Central Institute for Physical Chemistry. In 1986, she defended her dissertation on quantum chemistry, specifically calculating the reaction rates of colliding hydrogen molecules. This work demanded years of precise mathematical modeling, requiring immense patience and an eye for minute detail. For over a decade, she remained in the relative safety of the laboratory, publishing papers on reaction rate theory and molecular spectroscopy. But on November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. This sudden change ended her quiet life of research, acting as a gateway to an entirely new existence where the unpredictable interactions of human behavior would replace the orderly equations of quantum mechanics. In October 1990, the formal reunification of Germany swept away the old political order, creating a sudden vacuum that required entirely new actors. For a West German establishment eager to integrate the East, a young scientist with no political baggage was a valuable asset. Merkel stepped out of the laboratory and joined the Christian Democratic Union. She quickly caught the eye of Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Looking to build a bridge to the newly incorporated eastern states, Kohl chose a quiet physicist as his protege, granting her direct access to the inner circles of national power. In January 1991, Kohl appointed her as the Federal Minister for Women and Youth, making her the youngest member of his cabinet. To many in Bonn, she was merely Kohl's tactical choice, nicknamed the Girl. But the ministry provided Merkel with her first institutional platform, a space to learn the mechanics of federal governance. She was no longer an observer of Germany's transformation. She was now positioned inside the very machinery of state power. In 1994, Helmut Kohl promoted Merkel to Minister for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety. This was not a symbolic post. It became her training ground for international diplomacy. At the 1995 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Berlin, she spent days negotiating behind closed doors, eventually securing the first ever international agreement on greenhouse gas reduction targets. She was learning how to build consensus from seemingly impossible positions. Yet the West German political establishment, dominated by conservative Roman Catholic men, still viewed her as an outsider. She systematically disarmed these skeptics not through fiery rhetoric, but by outlasting them. When a party donation scandal engulfed Kohl in late 1999, Merkel saw her moment. On December 22nd, she published an open letter in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, calling on the CDU to move past its patriarch. It was a calculated, high-stakes move that severed her ties with her mentor. By April 2000, the party elected her as its chairwoman. She was no longer Kohl's protege. She was a national contender. 5 years later, after a razor-thin election victory, she secured a coalition deal. On November 22, 2005, Angela Merkel took the oath of office as Germany's first female chancellor. 3 years into her chancellorship, the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 triggered a global financial panic. In Germany, the threat was immediate. On September 29, 2008, Finance Minister Peer Steinbrück announced a joint public-private credit line of 35 billion euros to rescue hypo real estate. Within days, that figure escalated to 50 billion. Rather than launching sweeping structural overhauls, Merkel applied a deliberate, stepwise methodology to contain the systemic risk. On October 17th, the Bundestag established the Sonderfonds Finanzmarkt Stabilisierung, or SOFIN, providing 400 billion euros in guarantees and 80 billion in direct capital. Merkel and Steinbrück stood before the cameras, guaranteeing all private German bank deposits to prevent a bank run. Supporters praised this measured response as a masterclass in risk mitigation and damage control, keeping Germany anchored while global markets buckled. But critics saw the beginning of a frustrating pattern, arguing that her incremental style was too cautious, too slow, and excessively focused on shielding the state's coffers at the expense of bold, decisive action. The crisis had rewarded steadiness, but it also established a polarizing template for how Europe's largest economy would handle existential threats. The economic tremors of 2008 soon mutated into an existential threat to the single currency itself. By early 2010, Greece faced imminent default, exposing a deep structural fault line within the Eurozone, the clash between European solidarity and strict fiscal discipline. As the primary contributor to any European rescue fund, Germany held the keys to the bailouts. Inside the negotiating rooms in Brussels, Merkel refused to write blank checks. She insisted on a strict policy of conditionality, demanding that financial aid be tied directly to severe domestic reforms, public spending cuts, and structural tax overhauls. To Merkel, handing out funds without rigorous oversight would create a moral hazard, rewarding fiscal negligence and undermining the long-term stability of the euro. This approach turned European summits into marathons of endurance. For days and nights on end, Merkel bargained with European leaders, adjusting proposals, revising loan terms, and incrementally constructing a safety net that eventually grew into the European Stability Mechanism. But this step-by-step containment carried a heavy price. In Athens, the required austerity measures triggered deep recessions, widespread unemployment, and intense public anger, with protesters frequently directing their fury at the German chancellor. While her supporters argued that her disciplined negotiations saved the Eurozone from a catastrophic collapse, critics charged that her stubborn focus on austerity caused immense humanitarian suffering and frayed the social fabric of Southern Europe. The crisis was no longer just a math problem. It was a battle over the very meaning of a unified Europe. On March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, triggering a meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The fallout reached far past the Pacific. In Berlin, the disaster shattered Angela Merkel's energy strategy. Only months earlier, her government had extended the lifespan of Germany's nuclear plants. Now the physicists faced a catastrophic variable that bypassed previous safety calculations. Merkel reacted with speed. Applying the precautionary principle to a low-probability, high-impact risk, she suspended the nuclear extensions and announced an accelerated Atomausstieg, a complete national nuclear shutdown by 2022. On June 6, 2011, her cabinet approved the phase-out, committing Germany to a rapid transition toward renewables, known as the Energiewende. Supporters lauded the swift reversal as a responsible, evidence-based reaction to a new global reality. To them, she was a scientist recognizing a flawed hypothesis. But critics saw political opportunism designed to disarm the anti-nuclear Green Party ahead of key state elections. This abrupt phase-out forced Germany into a precarious compromise. To keep the power grid stable while building renewable infrastructure, the country relied heavily on domestic coal and Russian gas, leaving the nation vulnerable to future energy blockades. In March 2014, Russian troops entered Crimea, annexing the peninsula and throwing post-Cold War stability into chaos. For Merkel, this was a direct challenge to the European border order. She rejected a military response, warning that sending weapons to Ukraine would provoke a larger war. Instead, she spent months holding together a fragile European consensus to impose targeted economic sanctions on Moscow. Yet even as she rallied Europe to penalize Russia, Merkel defended the construction of Nord Stream 2, a 1,200-kilometer offshore gas pipeline directly linking Russia to northern Germany. To critics, it was a dangerous contradiction that bypassed Ukraine and handed Vladimir Putin immense power over Europe's energy grid. To Merkel, it was a commercial necessity. The cracks in the international order quickly widened. In July 2016, Britain voted to exit the European Union, forcing Merkel to balance protecting the single market with preventing a chaotic, hostile breakup. At the same time, the transatlantic alliance faced severe strain with the election of Donald Trump. Trump publicly targeted Germany, accusing the nation of free-riding on NATO defense spending and declaring at the 2018 NATO summit that Berlin was totally controlled by Russia due to its gas pipelines. Merkel maintained her calm, systematic composure, but the strategic environment had shattered. Her steady, incremental diplomacy was now tested by a world increasingly hostile to consensus. The initial warmth of Germany's response to the refugee crisis soon chilled under the weight of domestic polarization. As local municipalities struggled to integrate hundreds of thousands of newcomers, a series of high-profile Islamist terrorist attacks across Europe intensified public anxiety. This volatile climate fueled the rapid rise of the right-wing Alternative for Germany, or AfD, which won seats in the Bundestag in 2017, fracturing the post-war political consensus. Inside the machinery of government, Chancellery Chief Peter Altmaier and Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière worked to manage the logistical friction, implementing tighter border checks and stricter asylum laws to quiet the growing dissent. Yet before the country could recover from these political wounds, a global pandemic arrived as the ultimate challenge of state capacity. On March 18, 2020, Merkel delivered an unscheduled, televised address, calling the crisis Germany's greatest challenge since the Second World War. Bypassing political theater, the former quantum chemist explained exponential virus transmission and the threshold for herd immunity with calm, mathematical precision, appealing directly to civic duty. But in a highly distrustful, hyper-connected media environment, even scientific consensus became a bitter battleground, presenting a final, exhausting test to her legacy of rational, measured governance. On December 8, 2021, Angela Merkel stepped down, leaving behind a continent reshaped by her 16-year tenure. Germany stood as Europe's undisputed economic engine, its public finances anchored by years of fiscal discipline. Throughout repeated debt crises and geopolitical shifts, her methodical approach had held the European Union together, cementing her status as a steady mediator on the world stage. Yet this stability carried lingering vulnerabilities. Her decision to shut down nuclear plants while expanding Nord Stream 2 left Germany heavily dependent on Russian gas, a strategic calculation that collapsed shortly after her departure. Domestically, the societal and political friction from her open border migration policy continued to polarize the electorate, fueling the rise of populist forces. Merkel left office not with a tidy resolution, but with a complex balance sheet, a legacy where the quiet preservation of order was inextricably bound to the long-term consequences of her choices. Before she ever entered a cabinet room, Angela Merkel spent years modeling the quantum interactions of colliding hydrogen molecules. This academic discipline shaped a political mind that treated governance not as a stage for ideological battles, but as a series of complex equations to be solved. To Merkel, a crisis was a set of variables, a negotiation, a chemical reaction requiring precise temperature control. She rejected the traditional theater of political performativity, preferring to gather exhaustive empirical data before formulating a response. This scientific methodology explains the step-by-step patience that often exasperated both her allies and her rivals. In Brussels summits, she routinely allowed other leaders to exhaust their rhetorical energy before stepping in. Her strategy was to listen, absorb every position, and isolate the minimum common denominator where consensus could survive. It was a style built on emotional discipline and personal humility, prioritizing quiet stability over grand, sweeping reforms. Instead of steering Germany towards sudden, unpredictable changes, she championed incremental adjustments, a political equivalent of the steady, controlled experiments she once conducted in her Berlin laboratory. Power was not something to be brandished. It was a resource to be managed with absolute mathematical precision. Today, Europe navigates a volatile new era, far removed from the quiet compromise of the laboratory. As global crises intensify, a vital question remains. Did methodical patience permanently stabilize a fractured continent, or merely postpone its reckoning? The era of quiet consensus has passed, but the true cost of calm is still being calculated. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.